Welcome to The Power of Now What, a podcast on overcoming the various problems and challenges that one encounters when on this spiritual path, when on a spiritual journey, when engaged in a practice such as meditation, and even post-awakening and post the enlightenment experience itself. This is episode 7 on socializing, alternatively titled 2 is the loneliest number. I'd like to speak today on a particularly common subject that is discussed in spiritual circles, on the subject of friends and friendship and socializing, and how one changes one's social life when engaged in the process of spirituality. Now, for me, this has been one of the most dramatic areas of change for me since developing spiritually, finding the spiritual path, and having these brief glimpses of awakening and enlightenment insight. Because, and this is why I'm such a passionate advocate for meditation and the spiritual journey, because a huge part of the shadow that was following me around fell away when I got into meditation and got into practicing some of these disciplines and really getting with some of these practices, disciplines, and understandings, deep understandings. Because my entire life, before any sense of awakening, before meditation, I felt profoundly alone, very alone. I felt weird as a kid. I felt odd. And I wonder how many people listening to this have had a similar experience of growing up, because it's ironically, there's a lot of people who feel very lonely. And just think of that as a bit of a juxtaposition in itself. That's quite strange that we can have a group of people that feel alone. That's kind of strange in itself. The clues are everywhere. But I wonder how many people have had this experience growing up, just feeling like the odd one out, feeling like you don't belong, feeling like everyone else seems to get it. Everyone else just seems to naturally be able to slot into friendships and social groups, and everyone seems to get it. But I don't. I just don't. And you internalize this and feel like a weirdo. Now, when you get into the spiritual path, all of that just disappears. It falls away. It's no longer a concern, it's no longer a problem, and you realize deeply where this came from in the first place, why it happened, and why you don't have to feel like that anymore. Stephen Fry, the English author, comedian, actor, poet, he does he's a genius. He's a very, very interesting man. And I remember watching a documentary once, and he said this line that really, it broke my heart for him, and also because on hearing it, I went, yes, I get it. And I felt this real connection and kindred spirit with Stephen Fry when he said this, because he said he always felt growing up like there must have been one day at school that he missed in which everyone else got taught how to be normal. There must have been a day where there was a lesson where they sat all the kids down and said, right, kids, this is how you be normal. This is how you make friends. This is how you fit in. And he said he's always felt like he missed that day. He must have been sick. He must have stayed at home then. And I can really relate to that. And I wonder how many people out there who ended up finding the spiritual path have had a similar experience. The poem Alone by Edgar Allan Poe puts it perfectly, and it goes, from childhood's hour I have not been as others were. I have not seen as others saw. I could not bring my passions from a common spring. From the same source I have not taken my sorrow. I could not awaken my heart to joy at the same tone. And all I loved alone. Then, in my childhood, in the dawn of a most stormy life was drawn, from every depth of good and ill, the mystery which binds me still. From the torrent or the fountain, from the red cliff of the mountain, from the sun that round me rolled in its autumn tint of gold, from the lightning in the sky as it passed me flying by, from the thunder and the storm and the cloud that took the form, when the rest of heaven was blue, of a demon in my view. A poem by Edgar Allan Poe called Alone. Interestingly, he wrote that when he was 20, and he never published it. This was published after his death. They found it in his notes. He never saw fit to publish that one. Ugh. And again, on reading that, I just felt this deep sense of connectedness and kinship with Poe, because I think a lot of people do understand and get that. And in many ways, I think if we had a deeper understanding of spirituality and spiritual matters, I would probably have been recognized as one of those kids. Like we could say it's like we often talk about different types of intelligence, like there's visual intelligence, or there's like physical intelligence, or there's cognitive intelligence, or like analytical intelligence, but we never speak about a spiritual intelligence. And there have always been people like this. There have always been kids like this, in that there's just, it's a very difficult intelligence to kind of categorize. And that's where, any group, society, or culture is going to struggle to accommodate for individuality. And I believe that that type of person is quite rare. And so we don't really know what to do with them. Sometimes there's growing recognition of something called HSP, which is highly sensitive person, and that categorizes me quite well. I would say it's like I'm incredibly sensitive. I don't mind admitting that. I don't mind saying that. I'm very sensitive. Like physically, I'm very sensitive. Emotionally, I'm very sensitive. I always have been, and I always will be. I think there's a lot of people like that, and I wonder if this HSP, or highly sensitive person, is a categorization that we're trying to bring in that kind of is a place to put the spiritually minded individual. So that's the origin sometimes of this kind of feeling of loneliness or isolation. I think is if you are of a particular inclination and you're destined to become a spiritual type of person, I wonder if this tendency towards feeling odd or feeling strange is almost a foreshadowing of what's to come later. In times gone past, there might have been a place to go. We could have gone to a monastery. We could have gone to, it probably would have been recognized by the elders or the adults around. It's like, oh, this kid's doesn't fit into the general social makeup of things, because this kid is aligned with God. This kid is clearly in the spiritual realm. This kid's not really in the physical as much as everyone else. He needs to go and speak to God, and that would be a socially accepted path that could have been taken. And well, I did a podcast on that sort of thing. So what tends to happen as we grow up, and I wanted to speak to the issue of socializing when we're on the spiritual journey, because it's something that a lot of people start to wonder about and maybe become slightly concerned about. Is, will I be able to keep my friends? How will my social life change? After all, after all, if you have become aware that you are infinite universal consciousness, that you no longer have an individual sense of identity, that you have dropped away the mask, all of these social masks that we wear, you drop the character that you've been playing to everyone, you start to wonder, will people still like me? I mean, I put the mask on in the first place so people will like me. A large part of why we've constructed the ego in the first place is because we construct it in order to fit in order to avoid social pain, and in order to feel social acceptance. So when this mask starts to drop, when the ego begins to drop, naturally we begin to worry, will I still fit in? I'd like to address some of this issue. So I'll start with talking about what the general approach to socializing is before we have any kind of spirituality, before we have any understanding of meditation or spiritual matters. Then speak a little about why the spiritual path solves a lot of these social issues that we have, and why the spiritual path solves the very tricky problem of loneliness, the very pervasive and common problem of feeling alone, feeling isolated. I'll be talking a little about how the spiritual journey can alleviate the suffering of this isolation and loneliness. And then I'd like to speak about some of the challenges, actually, that the spiritual path then presents when it comes to socializing, and then, therefore, how to overcome this. So, a huge part of the benefit of spirituality is because we begin dropping away need. We don't feel so needy anymore, and this is especially true of social interaction, because the deeper you get into the dropping away of the individual ego, the more you feel perfectly secure. All of your issues, imagine this, all of the problems you've ever had in terms of self-worth, self-confidence, self-image, your sense of value, your need for social validation and acceptance, all of this vanishes because it's the ego that needs that. Consciousness doesn't need that. Infinite universal consciousness needs nothing like that. It really doesn't. And when you really align with that understanding, all of your insecurities, all of your poor self-image, your poor self-esteem, your low confidence, all of it evaporates. It's just gone. It's gone. I know that might sound too good to be true, but it is true. That is why this is such a powerful journey to go on. And because of this, you no longer need so much social interaction, because to a large extent, our social interaction isn't because we enjoy friendships, it's because we're seeking the validation from other egos. We need other egos to say, yep, your ego is good, my ego is good, we're all good, we're all safe and secure in our group here because we're all approving each other. And it's a very common trap to fall into, that a lot of people would say, yes, this is my friendship group, but it's not really a friendship group. It's just a group of false selves hanging out with each other to approve and validate each other. And these interactions don't go very deeply at all, which is why I don't know if you've ever had the experience of you feel like you've gone along to a social event just to kind of keep up an appearance, just to show your face, as they say, as we say in the common parlance. I'd better go along. There's a feeling of obligation, like you have to go. I feel it's like you have to go to work. So, well, I'd better go along because I feel like I need to show my face. What? Why? Like, what it again, just because something is normal doesn't mean that it's sane. Just because something is normal doesn't mean that it's healthy. And this idea, well, I'd better go, but you go along and you hate every second of it. Have you ever gone to a party that you didn't want to go to? You didn't want to go to it. You knew you weren't going to enjoy it. But you kind of force it because everyone around says, well, it might be good. You might enjoy it when you get there. But on a deep level, with deep intuition, you're going to go along and you're not going to enjoy it. Lo and behold, you go along and you don't enjoy it. The moment you get there, you start looking for the door. You start looking for an excuse to leave. And this is before like the meditative path, the meditative journey. You don't really feel like you have a choice in this. This is just the way things are. you have to go along to social events, and there's this general background understanding that it's good for you. It's good to socialize. But I would suggest, let's just look at this perspective here. If you're just going to hang out just to be in proximity of other people, is that healthy? Why? What is the actual purpose of doing that? It's like a tick box exercise to say, yes, I have received my adequate amount of validation today. Now I can go and do what I actually want to do, which is something completely different to all of this. So it's always worth questioning. And I believe one of the most powerful spiritual questions that you can have ingrained in your mind is, are you sure? And always question yourself with that. Are you sure? Are you sure? It's like, well, I have to go to this party. Are you sure? Are you? Do you really need to go? What is this need? What happens if you don't go? Do you evaporate? Do you die? What happens if you don't go to the party that you didn't want to go to in the first place? I'll tell you what happens. Nothing. Nothing at all happens. You don't become a hermit. You don't lose every single friend you've ever had. If you stop going to social interactions that you didn't even want to go to anyway, what happens is you become a happy person. That's the dreadful consequence of turning down the party invite. Nothing happens other than a sense of peace and happiness. Because on the spiritual path, you just start to enjoy your own company a lot more, and that is where a deep sense of security comes in. So what is happening here when we we feel a need to hang around with other people even if we don't want to? Well, if you are identified with your ego, if you're identified with your individual sense of being a temporary separate self, it needs other people to validate it. So it we put this mask on in the first place to avoid social pain and to enjoy social acceptance. But we then become to believe that we are the mask. You believe that you are the character. And because that character was created in order to avoid rejection and to feel acceptance, that character's existence depends on those things. That character's very existence requires social approval. Now, if you spend time on your own, this illusory false character begins to diminish. Because I'll ask you this: where does your identity go when you're asleep at night? And within this present moment, where does your identity go when there's nobody around? Are you still, if you were on a desert island, God forbid, you get marooned on a desert island and there's nobody around, and sadly, you're never going to see anyone ever again for the rest of your life, are you still your name? Are you still your personality? Are you still your character? Are you still your past? Are you still your future? No, you're none of those things because there's nobody around to validate that character. Those things disappear. So here's what happens. Here is what that feeling is of feeling like I must go to the party to keep up these appearances. When you're on your own, the character begins to fade. And as it fades, it starts to panic and becomes desperate for its supply. It needs its source in order to reaffirm its own existence. So we get this desperate neediness. And I wonder if you know people like this who message you every single day, who always want to hang out constantly. They message all the time, and the conversations you have never go particularly deep. They're just noise for the sake of noise. And you become very aware that there are these people who are desperate to be validated by others, to gain some attention and energy from other people in order to prop up and reaffirm their own illusory, fake, false self. They need somebody to just come along, give them the thumbs up, and say, yes, I approve of your mask. And obviously, you see this all over social media. Spoken before, social media is a fantastic mirror. And I think social media is one of the greatest things that has happened to humanity, precisely because it has shown us how false our sense of individual identity is. It's all a load of rubbish. You just scroll through social media, you can see your own profile isn't an accurate reflection of you, other people's profile isn't an accurate reflection of them. And this is a metaphor and an analogy for our own individual senses of identity, even when we're acting in the physical world, speaking to someone. All you're actually doing is trying to get your profile across, and you're hoping that it will be validated and you'll get those likes, comments, shares. By the way, don't forget to like and subscribe this video. Again, I'm not saying I'm above anything. I still fall into all of these old traps. I'm not trying to say that I'm somehow a an awakened being that walks above all of these traps and issues. I do it every single day still. I'm just, the only difference now is that I'm aware I'm doing it. So what happens then on the spiritual path? There's two things that happens when you begin to get into your meditation and you begin to get into the spiritual journey and deeply understanding some of these principles and having an insight into your true nature, which is infinite universal consciousness, you start to enjoy your own company a lot more. And it's not that you lock yourself away and you go, right, that's it, I'm done with social interaction, I'm fed up with this whole thing, I want to get rid of my ego, so I'm going to go and lock myself away. Maybe for a time you do that, and I think that can be a very useful thing to go and do to sort of go through this period. But in my experience, what starts to happen is, because you feel more secure and okay in your own company, you just stop saying yes to things that you didn't want to go to anyway, and you don't worry about this then. So if somebody says, hey, do you want to meet up for a coffee, and you say, actually, not today, sorry, I'm just not really feeling it today, you don't also then go and worry about that, or not, what if I lose that friend, what, I hope they weren't offended by that. You just don't really you don't want to offend anyone, because why would you? But at the same time, if you weren't up for it, then you weren't up for it. And you just fall into this more peaceful, serene state where you can take it or leave it. And as this sense of security grows in you, you probably will find that certain elements of your social life start to fall away, but you realize you don't really miss it. And what it is replaced with is healthier, deeper connections, often with less people. There's a great riddle here, and I wonder if you can answer this riddle. Uh, the fewer you have, the more one is worth. What is it? I'll give you a minute. The fewer you have, the more one is worth. The answer is a friend. The fewer friends you have, the better friends you have. That's how things kind of go in my experience. And this is what happens on the spiritual path, as the friendships that weren't particularly deep, you just end up, you don't really go to stuff that you didn't want to go to anyway, and you start to gravitate more towards activities that do fulfill you. In my experience, even though I will say that there's some days that might go by where I don't really have much social interaction at all, because and it's not a problem. It's not like I decided to isolate myself. It's nothing like that. And it's not like um I'm seeking out solitude or isolation. It's just that it doesn't really happen. You just go long periods of time without really socializing because you're purely happy as you are. Now that will sound scary to an ego. That's what feels threatened by that. I'll get a little bit more to that later. Now, alongside this, so one thing that happens is you feel more secure in your own company. So you don't seek out other people just to be in close proximity to someone else and talk a load of noise to reaffirm your false ego. Alongside that, you become more aware of your internal emotional energy. You become very conscious of the feeling inside yourself, and you start to pay less attention to the content of people's words and actions. And instead, you develop a better sense of that person's energy. You start to feel their emotional profile, and sometimes slightly unsettlingly, sometimes in a manner of there are insights that sometimes arise where you go, that's odd. You might notice that there are people in your life who previously you considered quite close friends, and you start to realize, hang on a minute, hang on. Every time I speak to that person, I come away feeling drained. I come away from speaking to that person feeling low. I don't feel good about myself when I come away from speaking to that person. And you start to think, well, that's odd because I thought that person was like a really good friend. So why would I feel low around that person? And as you start to become automatically very conscious, you continually drop into your body rather than go up into your mind. Drop into your body, and you start to notice when you see certain people, your heart kind of sinks a bit. You feel your defenses come up. This could even be like family as well as friends. And previously you thought, oh yeah, that we've got like a loving deep connection, but then you notice, but hang on, that's at odds. There is a dissonance here because in my mind I think this is a deep connection, but emotionally I have my guard up around this person. I feel tense around this person. I feel invalidated. I feel low. I don't like being around this person on a deep gut level. Your intuition is starting to, you become aware of something your intuition was always trying to tell you, and actually you start to realize, hang on a minute, this person isn't good for me at all. And then you start to notice that they make little comments every now and then, and they're quite negative about all of your projects that you've got going on there. They don't have much pleasant things to say about other people. They're always gossiping. They're always talking negatively about life and about the world. And you realize that this person is a mood hoover, sometimes called an energy vampire, or at its most pronounced and severe end, this could be a narcissist. And there are lots and lots of them around, but most people don't recognize them because, boy, they can be a wolf in sheep's clothing. And the more conscious and more aware you become, the more you notice this. Now, this is one of the challenges and problems of spirituality, or a perceived problem in spirituality. A lot of people are worried that if I drop my mask, if I drop my ego and my false sense of self, am I going to be completely defenseless against other people who may have ill intent towards me? So let's not be naive about people, because people who are very unconscious, people who are very egoic, people who are very needy and very identified with their false self can be sneaky, manipulative, mean. They can be users. They can drain you. They can take from you. They can run rings around you. They can be two-faced. People can be horrible. And unconscious people can be horrible. And people worry that, well, if I drop my mask and I stop worrying about things so much, are these people going to take advantage of me? Will I not just become manipulated by other people? In my experience, it's precisely the opposite, because it becomes impossible to ignore your gut instinct. The moment somebody turns up and they're all smiles and, hey, how you doing, man? But your gut is churning and your teeth are clenched and you go, I don't know what it is about this person, but my internal alarms are going haywire. And you just, with a wry smile, you just sort of smile and nod, and it's like, not today, thank you. And because you're developing emotionally and spiritually, you have no problem with just walking away. And you have no problem. You're not concerned or worried about disconnecting or disengaging, which is the best approach to an energy vampire or a narcissist. Trust me, just withdraw all supply. I'll probably do an entire podcast on dealing with narcissists. So that's what happens as you start to those people, the drainers, the energy drainers, start to naturally disappear from your life, and instead you start to align with healthier, more better connections with people, deeper, real, felt connections, because you're intuiting. Just as you intuit with the negative low consciousness people, you can also intuit when somebody is high consciousness, when somebody is pleasant to be around, and you start to gravitate towards them and they gravitate towards you. It's just something that happens naturally. It just happens. So I would suggest, or I would say, that it seems, not always, not in every case, but it might be the case that, yes, you notice your friendship group gets smaller, but the fewer you have, the more one is worth. Friends. You're the people that you spend your energy in proximity with diminishes, but what you gain is more actual friends. That's what happens on the spiritual path. It's not the other way around. You don't lose friends, you gain friends. Before the spiritual path, you don't have any real friends. You don't have any deep, real connections with people. It's just false egos talking to false egos. That's all that happens. Have you ever heard the phrase, the loneliest place is in a crowd? That's what happens. You are surrounded by people and everybody feels completely isolated. Tragic. Nothing less than tragic. It shouldn't happen. So, some of the challenges presented here as you feel the old friends falling away, and people are, I say old friends, the old people begin to fall away. The social group gets smaller, friends begin to increase, because another concern people have is they feel their false sense of ego dropping away. As it begins to dissolve and fade, we start to think, well, will people still like me? Will I still be likable? Will I still be nice? After all, I've spent a lot of time finally crafting this ego so that it's a presentable and acceptable character for other people. And once that begins to fall away, you might panic a little and go, will people still like me? Because this is now your authentic self coming through. And our inner child is terrified that our authentic self won't be liked or accepted. Well, we're adults now. We're adults now. And have you ever met somebody? You'll know people like this. Think of somebody in your life who you just like being around. Could be family, could be friends, could be a close friend, could be your partner. If you're lucky enough, this is your partner, your husband or your wife, hopefully. Somebody that when you're around them, you feel at peace. There's something about them that is just peaceful. Have you ever been around somebody who you feel naturally happy around them? And it's not because they're all jumping around, buzzing, full of positivity and energy. They're actually quite quiet people. They're quite they're quietly positive. They're quietly optimistic. They're at peace. They're serene. They're they're just nice people to be around. All people like that are naturally quite attuned to the infinite universal consciousness. There is less franticness in them, there is less neediness in them, and there is a natural optimism and a natural serenity that surrounds these people. Everybody likes people like that. Everybody. And you will be aware of people in your community or your friendship group who are just known for being that kind of person. And you can sense on a deep level that this isn't an act. This is not a mask. This is their true self. They are just somebody who is at peace, and that peace radiates outwards. And that is that is the authentic self. You'll notice that there are similarities, but even amongst like very awakened people, there's deep individuality as well. It presents in very different ways. Some people are a bit more, I don't know, more humorous. Other people are more silent. Some people are more deep thinker and contemplatey. But there are common threads amongst most awakening people of this deep sense of serenity, a a deep assuredness, a deep confidence that all is well. That's the aura that surrounds these people. It's an all is well sort of feeling. If you look at the statues of the Buddha, look at the little smile and recognize that smile. That smile is a smile that is within you as well, on the deepest level, just knowing, intuiting all is well. So don't worry about being liked. You don't need to be liked. What is this need to be liked? When you drop the need to be liked, ironically, you end up being more liked. And that's the bind. That is the double bind we always find ourselves in. In order to have something, don't want it. I often think one of the best analogies I guess, incidentally, as a little side note, why enlightenment is so difficult. Let me just draw a little analogy here. If I had £1,000,000 in a safe, locked away in a safe, a magical safe, and I said, the only way, here is how you open the magical safe. There's £1,000,000 in there, but the safe will only open, and you can only have the £1,000,000 if you don't want the £1,000,000. If you don't want it, the safe will open. But the moment you want it, the safe will just lock even tighter. And the more you desire the £1,000,000, the harder the safe will be to open. But the less you want it, the easier the safe will be to open. And when you truly don't want that £1,000,000 at all, you don't want it, you don't need it, you couldn't care less, you're not interested, then the safe opens. Now you can't pretend. You can't pretend to not want it. You can't tell the safe you don't want it. It has to be a true, deep intuition on the deepest level to no longer want or need the £1,000,000. And when that happens, then the safe pops open. Ha! Try it. And yeah, well, that so I don't want to be unsympathetic. I'm trying to like make out like it's dead easy to just drop your ego and to just don't need to be liked anymore. But that's kind of how it goes, because the less friends you need, the more friends you will have. Ugh, what a bind. What a bind. So that challenge there is the one of, will I still be liked? How do I still make friends? You just will. They will just naturally gravitate towards you. It is a total non-issue. and actually one that falls away, I find in my experience, fairly naturally, fairly easily. The ego is just relieved, actually. There's a deep sense of relief, like, oh, good, I don't have to do any of that nonsense anymore. One common mistake that arises as a result of this fear and insecurity, again, is the spiritual coat of paint. So people discover the meditation, they watch all the YouTube videos, they go to the yoga meditation classes, and all of a sudden they go, oh, great. And they cover themselves in the spiritual decoration, and they just add these things to their ego. And it just becomes, it's like an interesting thing to talk about at parties so that people will like them. Like trying to be interesting by talking about again, what do you think I'm trying to do right now? Trying to become interesting by talking about these things in a desperate hope to be accepted. That sounds familiar. I wonder why. Huh. So not putting a spiritual coat of paint on yourself, that is definitely a mistake I have made and continue to make, but I'm just very aware of it. If you put the spiritual coat of paint on yourself in order to be liked, you're missing out. You're missing out on the promise of spirituality, because this is what it feels like when you're in a beautifully present state and a beautifully awake, calm, and peaceful state. You feel like you have your best friends around you, even when you're on your own. Everything becomes your best friend. Everything is your best friend. Life itself is your best friend. Your own experience is your best friend. You can go walking through nature and have a deeper connection with a seagull than with any person you've ever spoken to. You could sit there, a seagull lands on the bench next to you, and you feel a deep sense of connection with this being. And there is a wry smile that appears on your face and you can feel this. I know I sound crazy right now, but I'm not. No, I'm not. You can feel this deep sense of connection with all beings. And every now and then, you might make eye contact with an animal or sit next to a tree, and there is just a feeling, a deep experience of, oh, wow, this isn't just a concept. This isn't a theory. This isn't imagination or idea. This is real. This is true. I share the same being with this tree, with this animal, with the landscape around me. I actually am this, really, truly am. And when that begins to happen, why would I need to go to the pub? Why do I need to go and be surrounded by noisy, loud, obnoxious people, full of their little digs and their little games and their constant little tiny little manipulations and their sort of up down this social positioning, who's better than who's more attractive than who's doing better in life, all of this jockeying for position that happens. I ain't interested in that. I ain't joining in that. I don't want to play anymore. I ain't playing that game. I'm happy out here. This is where life really is. I'm in the sunshine. I'm connected. I feel connected out here on my own. Around people, I feel alone and miserable because I don't want to play that game. It sucks. You can keep your game. So, some of these problems that arise and the solution, in my experience, to them. So the feeling of the friendship group becoming smaller and that sort of panic that can begin to rise up. The solution is just recognize the depth of the friendships that are beginning to bloom naturally, and don't force it. I would say that some of my best advice is, well, don't force anything, because we're not trying to gain control. If you seek out, it's like, so you might hear this and go, great, okay, so what I need to do is go and find some spiritual people to hang out with. That's just another trap. You're trying to control it's just another way that ego is going to try and hijack the spiritual path. Oh, I need to seek out the spiritual people. They will arrive naturally, and often they arrive in just be open. Be so open to anyone and anything, even if these are people who are not ordinarily people you would hang out with. It doesn't matter if they're older, younger, what they look like, man, woman, it doesn't matter. It because you don't see that anymore. You see their energy, you see their spirit, and you feel their spirit on a deep level. So forget the visual appearances of people and instead pay attention to how you feel when people are around. And you'll notice you don't have to go and seek anyone out there. There's probably already people in your life who you suddenly recognize. You suddenly realize you've been taking them for granted. You go, oh, hang on a minute. So and so is a very, very good friend. I thought they were an acquaintance, but actually they are a deep, deep friend of mine. And so you begin to nourish and nurture that friendship, that connection. So don't feel you have to go seeking out Buddhas to go hang around with. There's probably a number of them already around you, and you can deepen the connection with those people that fulfill you. So fewer friends is absolutely fine. And I would suggest to very much remember that this social conditioning is falling away. And it's the conditioning that makes you feel like you need to be around people at all times. Notice you will see this happening. This is a post-awakening problem. As you begin to feel happier in your own company and spend time on your own, you will get message after message of people going, hey, haven't seen you in a while. Just checking in, everything's okay. Just checking in that you're okay, that everything's fine. And naturally, this is because people care. People are compassionate. So you message back and say, yeah, absolutely fine. Just spending a bit of time on my own. And true friends are satisfied with this, but you'll find a lot of people cannot stand it. They can't stand that you're drifting away because they take it as an insult. And there's a lot of people. This is the reason why society and the culture we're in cannot stand loners, cannot stand people who enjoy their own company because they take it as an insult. They feel like you're rejecting them. And the culture itself doesn't like to be rejected. That's what's happening. So you might encounter a little bit of turbulence as the social conditioning still affects all of the people around you. This is an insight that arises. So I wonder if you've had the experience, if you're on the meditative path, you sat in meditation for an hour and you're feeling beautifully peaceful and serene, and you go to yourself, right, I am going to be fully accepting, fully peaceful. I'm going to bring the light and joy that has risen up in me. I'm going to share it with all the people around me, even the people I sometimes come into conflict with. I'm going to extend love and warmth and gratitude. And you try to interact with people in a very present and spiritual way. And it doesn't take long until that person has dragged you right back into ego. It's not that the other person has dragged you back into ego, it's that your ego's gone willingly. Your ego's gone, oh yeah, great. Now we've got a mirror. Now there's a mirror I can look into and reaffirm my existence. It's very difficult to try and I'm going to bring my awakening to others, hoping that you can stay present and stay open, empty, spacious as infinite consciousness. The moment you start interacting with people, you you fall into the very deeply ingrained social conditioning patterns. And it's not long until you find yourself lost, fully identified as ego, as false self again. That's just something that happens. And it's worth noting, look, this isn't, you haven't failed, because then you feel guilty. You go, oh, I was supposed to be staying present today. Don't feel guilty that you didn't stay present, and don't resent the other people that you feel like, oh, they've dragged me back into being a person again. It's just a part of the process, and naturally you just, as you deepen, and it's all about identifying. If you can just constantly reaffirm that you are the consciousness, the infinite universal consciousness, the fewer hooks can drag you back into ego identity. But don't try to exude this sense of presence. Just because it doesn't work, it's just another attempt at control. Instead, it's just constantly about just reaffirm experientially. Universal consciousness doesn't need friends. It's never had any friends, because it is everyone. That's why you start to feel connected with everyone and everything, because there are no individuals. There aren't any. There are no individual people. There are no individual egos. It's an illusion. We're the bumper cars bumping into each other, thinking that we're all the separate individual one, not recognizing that we're all connected to the same power source that's above us. If we all looked up and realized, oh, we're all connected, there wouldn't be any need for this social game anymore. There'd be no need for these hierarchies. There'd be no need for any of this social positioning that goes on, because it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't. It doesn't. I've just said it. It doesn't actually make any sense. There's no need to. There'd be no need to. So just remembering that sometimes the panic that you're feeling, you think, oh, am I just becoming a hermit? Am I isolating myself? Remember that the social conditioning cannot stand seeing people isolating themselves. I think we do people a huge disservice by, there's this image that is beginning to rise up of these like ultra isolated people who are, they're hooked on video games and porn, and they just sit in their dark rooms with their VR headsets on, and they just live these ultra isolated, lonely lives. But I mean, again, I always draw the analogy back to the monk. Let's use the image of a Zen monk in his cell in a monastery, meditating with the sunlight coming in through the window, and the Zen monk just sits there meditating in total peace and bliss. Now, he's on his own, or she, if it's a nun. They're on their own. That monk sits there fully isolated from the outside world, no connection to the outside world at all. But are they lonely? Absolutely not. They are experiencing a state of bliss that is healthy for them, that is healthy for the people around them, that is healthy for the world, that is healthy for humanity, that is healthy for the planet. Now, it's not the isolation that's the problem. It's our perspective, our beliefs, our opinions that are the problem. So if we could get a bit more of the message out there about spirituality and about meditation, these people who are locked up alone, staring at computer screens and, getting into a very negative state of mind due to their isolation. That is why we fear the ones who are isolated, because we fear, as the old African proverb goes, the child that is not accepted by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. Ooh, that's a dark one. But that's why we fear the loner. But if we can teach people to meditate, preferably at a young age, this wouldn't happen, because we'd no longer be seeking that stimulation and validation when that feeling of isolation, social alienation begins to creep in, because it's only the ego, it's only the false identification with an illusory separate self that can feel alienated, that can feel lonely. The true self, consciousness, cannot feel lonely. And so if we can teach people to connect with that, there's no more loneliness. And a lot of these antisocial behaviors would fall away. I will say this. It's easy for us in the spiritual circles to make out like this journey is easy. For good reason, because there is a simplicity to the process that we should never forget. But in constantly reaffirming the simplicity of the practice, it sounds like, oh, well, it should be easy. But it's not. It's not. The ego goes kicking and screaming. It really does. Because its origins are in a very vulnerable, fragile place. And so it does not go lightly. It does not go gently into that good night. And so courage is needed. Courage. Have the courage to trust your instinct, trust your intuition, that you're beginning to feel peace, love, and joy. And this dark shadow of feeling alone, as Edgar Allan Poe puts it so beautifully in that poem. From childhood's hour, I have not been as others were. I have not seen as others saw. I could not bring my passions from a common spring. It's that sense of, I'm just not interested in the same things other people are. I just don't care. It's not worth it. I don't want to go and watch football. It's too loud. There's too much going on. I'm not going to force myself to go through events just so that I can avoid feeling lonely. The game is not worth the candle on that one. And so have some courage that that shadow is now passing, the feeling that there was always something wrong with you, the feeling that you're alienated, the feeling that you're isolated and alone. It was never true. It was never true. You were never weird. You weren't. I'm telling you, you weren't. You're not odd. You're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with your soul. There's nothing wrong with your spirit. You're not crazy. You're not. You're not strange. You're not weird. There is absolutely nothing wrong with you, and there never has been. Not once. And do not be satisfied until you truly feel that. Not on a surface level. We're not going to create a new ego that says, I don't care what people think. I'm happy being weird. No, no, no. Drop into a deep experiential understanding that, no, I'm not weird. There is nothing wrong with me. Thanks very much. I'm not playing the game. I'm not playing anymore. Some courage will be needed for that. Courage. There is a sense of, if you've ever been at a party and you've just had enough, and you look around at everyone having this, they're all drunk, they're all loud, some of them are on drugs, and it's getting wild. There are fights breaking out. People are starting to go up to rooms together, and it's just loud and full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. And you feel tired. You feel tired, and you look around at everything that everyone's doing, and you think, this isn't for me. That's what life feels like sometimes. I just look around at this madness, the chaos, the confusion, the desperateness, the insanity, the desperate clawing, the arguing, the fighting, the desperation and chaos of the whole thing. If you've ever been at a party like that and thought, this isn't for me, and you just think it's time to, I'm not enjoying this, it's time to go. And then the best thing to do in that situation is don't tell anyone you're about to leave. Because if you start trying to tell people, one, you have to tell everyone, and two, they're going to try their hardest to convince you to stay. And they will do so with every temptation under the sun, because they will take your leaving of the party as a rejection, and culture abhors rejection. So don't tell anyone. You look for the back door, and when you see your moment, leave. Just leave and wander out into the cool, calm, serene night air. The moonlight shines down on you. The air is fresh, cool, and you can stroll home in perfect serenity and see the foxes, the creatures that wander around in nature, to hear the distance of the party, the shouting, the clamoring, the noise, the fury behind you as it just begins to dim, as it falls away back over the horizon, and you are left with the cool, sweet night air under the calm moonlight, and that small, knowing smile can just begin to grow on your face. Never should have gone to the party in the first place, and now I'm glad I'm out. I'm going to leave you with a poem by Charles Bukowski, and he's a famously misanthropic kind of poet, but there is a curious optimism and a curious dark hope in his words. But he's also an outsider and somebody who has always felt alone in a crowd. And so I thought this poem is quite fitting. It's called The Genius of the Crowd, and it goes: there is enough treachery, hatred, violence, absurdity in the average human being to supply any given army on any given day. And the best at murder are those who preach against it, and the best at hate are those who preach love. And the best at war, finally, are those who preach peace. Those who preach God need God. Those who preach peace do not have peace. Those who preach peace do not have love. Beware the preachers. Beware the knowers. Beware those who are always reading books. Beware those who either detest poverty or are proud of it. Beware those quick to praise, for they need praise in return. Beware those who are quick to censor. They are afraid of what they do not know. Beware those who seek constant crowds, for they are nothing alone. Beware the average man, the average woman. Beware their love. Their love is average, seeks average. But there is genius in their hatred. There is enough genius in their hatred to kill you, to kill anybody. Not wanting solitude, not understanding solitude, they will attempt to destroy anything that differs from their own. Not being able to create art, they will not understand art. They will consider their failure as creators only as a failure of the world. Not being able to love fully, they will believe your love incomplete. And then they will hate you. And their hatred will be perfect. Like a shining diamond. Like a knife. Like a mountain. Like a tiger. Like hemlock. Their finest art. The Genius of the Crowd by Charles Bukowski. Thank you so much for listening to the Power of Now What, episode 7. I'm so grateful for all of the likes, the subscribes, the comments. It's very heartening, so please keep it coming. If you don't follow me on Spotify, go follow me on Spotify. If you don't follow me or subscribe on YouTube, then go and subscribe on YouTube. I'm trying to grow the channel a little bit so I can keep this series going. In the pipeline, I have my complete works of guided meditations, my audio library of guided meditations that have been remastered now. I've gone through put them through the programs and done all the rebalancing and everything so that I can take out all of the adverts, all of the interruptions, and it's just pure, crisp, clear audio. 30 guided meditations that will be available soon. The complete works that I wanted to just put together into a collection and put out there, that'll be coming soon. But if you'd like to support me in the meantime, I simply appreciate all likes, all subscribes, all comments, and obviously let me know. Please do. I've had some fantastic suggestions for episodes. When I get these suggestions for episodes, it takes me a little while to just write my notes down and get my thoughts straight on everything. So they are all coming. I have one upcoming on emotional and mental pain, one upcoming on our approach to our own individual suffering, and the very, very common issue of how do we reconcile the suffering that we see around us, the injustice that we see, and the suffering that we see in the world around us. And that will be upcoming in a podcast very soon. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you are well. I hope you are healthy. I hope you are happy out there. Take care, be well, and stay present.